The chamber is open and full of whispers.
The seventh-floor corridor smells like burning stone and old blood. Harry doesn't think about the smell anymore. He stopped thinking about it somewhere around the third hour of the battle, when thinking about it was a luxury that people who weren't being shot at could afford. Now the smell is just information, like the sound of running feet 2 corridors over, which means retreating, or the absence of sound, which means something worse. He is moving fast. Hermione at his left shoulder. Ron half a step behind. The Horcrux. The cup. Nagini still breathing somewhere in this castle. The logic of the night has collapsed into a list, and Harry works the list because working the list is the only thing keeping him from thinking about how many people he has stepped over in the last 20 minutes, who will not get up again. Corridor junction. Left, 7 flights up. The room of requirement. The stone under his feet vibrates. Harry feels it before he hears it. A low, subsonic wrongness that travels up through the soles of his shoes and settles in his back teeth. Hermione feels it too. He knows because she grabs his arm. Structural, she says. One word. Sharp as a spell. She learned this. He watched her learn it. 3 in the morning in a Welsh forest, 6 months ago. Bent over a borrowed copy of Fortification and Failure, Structural Countercurse Theory, because 3 nights prior a Death Eater cell had dropped a farmhouse wall on a family of 4, and Hermione had decided, quietly and without announcement, that this would never happen near her again if she could help it. She memorized the chapter on pre-collapse resonance, the groan that stone makes when curse fire severs the load-bearing framework. She recognizes the sound. 20 feet ahead the corridor branches right. Percy Weasley is there, robes singed, blood on his forehead, laughing, actually laughing. Fred is beside him. Harry sees Fred's face mid-laugh, open, bright, the specific unguarded brightness that Fred Weasley only ever wore when something had surprised him into genuine joy. Percy has said something. Fred is 3 words into his response. His mouth is still forming the shape of the word since. The wall to their right begins to come apart. It does not explode. That is the thing Harry will remember later, in the dark, when he replays it. It doesn't announce itself. The stone simply separates. Block from block, mortar surrendering. A meter-wide section of ancient castle wall peeling away from itself, as though the building is exhaling something it has held too long. Hermione's wand is already up. Harry's is already up. Neither of them decides this. There is no decision. There is only the wall and Fred's face and a year of surviving together that has worn their reflexes into the same grooves. Protogo maxima. Both of them. Same syllable. Same instant. The spells don't merge so much as collide and hold, 2 fields of force slamming into each other from 2 angles, and instead of canceling, locking, bracing, forming a triangle of compressed magical pressure between Harry's position, Hermione's, and the falling stone. The wall buckles against it. Slows. 3 seconds. Percy doesn't need to be told. Percy is already moving, Percy, who for all his stiffness, for all the ministry-shaped armor he has spent years building around himself, was once a boy who shared a bedroom with 6 siblings and knows in his marrow what it means when something is falling toward his family. He seizes Fred by the collar with both hands and hauls. Fred goes backward along the floor, boots dragging, and the primary mass of the wall, the section, the bulk of it, the part that would have, passes to his left. A smaller piece catches his arm. There is a sound that Harry will also remember. A flat, dense crack. Nothing like the noise a spell makes. The sound of bone. Then dust. Everywhere, all at once. Gray and thick and total. Harry is coughing before he knows he's moving toward them. Hermione is already past him. The corridor is dark, the torches blown out by the pressure of the collapse. And for 3 seconds Harry can see nothing except the faint glow of Hermione's wand tip and the shapes of 2 men on the floor. Percy on his knees. Fred on his back. Fred's left arm at an angle that arms are not supposed to make. Fred, Percy's voice has no performance in it. Everything Percy Weasley has ever used to sound ministerial and measured and correct has been stripped away in the last 10 seconds, and what is underneath is just a brother, 22 years old, who thought he just watched something happen. "Fred, look at me." A pause. The dust settles. Fred coughs. It is, objectively, one of the worst coughs Harry has ever heard. Wet and ragged and full of things that coughs should not be full of. It goes on for several seconds. It bends Fred half upright and then drops him back down. His right hand finds the floor and presses flat against the stone like he is checking it is still there. Then he opens his eyes. He looks at Percy. Percy, who is shaking. Percy, who has both hands on Fred's collar still and cannot seem to make himself let go. Percy, who laughed for the first time in 3 years 30 seconds ago and then watched the castle try to take his brother away as immediate consequence. Fred looks at him for a long moment. "Perce," he says. His voice is ruined. Dust and blood and the specific roughness of someone who has just had the air driven out of them by several hundred kilograms of medieval stonework. But the tone is intact. "You absolute idiot," Fred Weasley says. "You just saved my life." Percy makes a sound that is not a word. "That is so embarrassing for you," Fred says. "Imagine being the one who—" He stops, breathes, winces at the breathing. Who saves the funny one? The important one. People are going to be devastated for you. "Shut up," Percy says. It comes out cracked down the middle. "I'm serious, Percy. This is going to follow you. Centuries from now, the history books are going to say Percy Weasley, who was famous primarily for saving someone significantly more charming than himself." "Shut up," Percy says again, and this time it is not an instruction. It is the voice of someone trying very hard not to come apart in a destroyed corridor in the middle of a battle, and only partially succeeding. Hermione is beside Fred now. Her bag is open, always ready. The beaded bag that has kept them alive for 12 months, carrying things no handbag should be able to carry. She finds the Dittany by touch, finds the blood-replenishing potion. Her hands are not shaking. Harry has never fully understood how Hermione's hands are never shaking when everything else is, and he stopped asking. "His arm is broken," she says. "Not I think or it looks like. Just the fact. Delivered clean. Ribs, the arm needs scale grow and that means 8 hours. She looks up at Percy. "You didn't let go of him." "No," Percy says. "Good." She presses the Dittany to the laceration at Fred's temple. Fred hisses. "Don't move the arm. Don't let him move it." "I'm right here," Fred says. "I know. Don't move the arm." "In what world would I, Fred?" "He doesn't move the arm." Harry is standing at the edge of this, and he realizes his wand is still raised, and his hands actually are shaking, slightly. In the aftermath of the spell, the adrenaline with nowhere left to go. He looks at Fred on the floor, Fred breathing, Fred complaining, Fred being intractable and alive and present in the way that Fred has always been present, which is loudly and without apology. Something moves in Harry's peripheral vision. He turns. George Weasley is standing at the far end of the corridor. Harry doesn't know how long he has been there. Long enough to have seen it. Long enough to have seen what almost happened, and what happened instead. The arm, the dust, Percy shaking, Fred's eyes open. George is very still. He reaches up and touches the left side of his head. The absence there. The ear he lost 9 months ago over little whinging. On the night that was supposed to be a clean extraction and wasn't. The ear that Snape's curse took. The wound they all learned to work around so completely that sometimes Harry forgets to notice it. George touches the absence. Then, he crosses the corridor in 12 steps and drops onto the floor beside his brother, and puts both arms around him with the particular desperation of someone who has just learned something about loss that they already thought they knew. Fred, to his credit, doesn't make a joke. He just grabs George's sleeve with his good hand. Holds it. The dust is still settling. Somewhere below them, the battle continues. Somewhere in this castle there are people dying, and decisions being made, and a war that is not over. Harry knows this. The list is still in his head. The cup. Nagini, the logic of the night, patient and relentless. But he stands there for another 4 seconds, watching Fred Weasley breathe. He allows himself that. They move Fred on a conjured stretcher. Hermione produces it one-handed, the spell already leaving her wand before Harry has finished the thought. Fred looks at it with the expression of a man who has aesthetic objections and insufficient leverage to raise them. "I want it noted," Fred says, as Percy and George guide him horizontal, "that I survived a wall, and I am being transported like furniture." "You are being transported like furniture," George says. Quietly. "I am never quiet. Tonight you are." The movement of settling onto the canvas does something to Fred's ribs that he absorbs without showing on his face. Harry watches the joke dissolve somewhere between Fred's throat and the open air, replaced by something controlled and private. The pain is real. Fred simply refuses to let it be the loudest thing in the room. George takes the front of the stretcher. Percy takes the back, his grip on the handles so tight his knuckles have gone the color of old paper. Harry looks at Hermione. She looks at him. "Go," she says. The Great Hall has become two things at once. Half of it is a battlefield. Half of it is a hospital. The long tables pushed to the walls. The floor exposed stone. People lying in rows. Some injured. Some tending to the injured. Some very still in ways that have nothing to do with sleep. The enchanted ceiling shows pre-dawn cloud, flat and dark and moving slowly, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. Madame Pomfrey moves between the fallen with the efficiency of someone who has divided the world into two categories and is working through them without pause. The Death Eater push toward the hall is organized, a dozen of them in loose formation. Dark robes, masks off now because there is no longer any pretense to be maintained. They are here to end this, and they know it. And they want the people inside to know it too. George Weasley meets them at the doorway. He is alone for 3 seconds. His shoulder is bleeding where a curse caught him 2 floors below, and he has not stopped to address it, and will not. He looks at the formation in front of him and his wand comes up, and his face does something that people who only know George Weasley from the shop, from the jokes, the products, the easy laugh, would not recognize. He is thinking about Fred on that stretcher. He casts, not a broad stupefy, not yet. Something targeted, precise, the leading edge of something larger, a signal sent on a frequency that has no name in any textbook, because it has never needed one. It simply exists between Fred Weasley and George Weasley, and has existed since before either of them understood what magic was. Across the hall, being carried on the stretcher by a conscripted second-year Hufflepuff, Fred opens his eyes. "Oh," he says, to no one. The Hufflepuff pauses. "What?" "He's about to do something without me." Fred tries to sit up. Hermione, walking beside the stretcher, still monitoring his vitals, pushes him firmly back down. Fred gestures emphatically with his good arm. "He needs me. You have 3 broken ribs and a concussion," Hermione says. He doesn't know that. Fred raises his wand anyway. One-handed. Left arm strapped across his chest, the compound fracture immobilized under Hermione's field splint. He raises his right hand toward the ceiling and finds George across the chaos of the hall, the way he has always found George, not by looking, but by knowing. They cast at the same instant, the same spell, from opposite ends of the same room, without coordinating it, without planning it, because they have never needed to plan it. George's stupefy, which should have stunned 2 opponents at most, connects with Fred's across the space between them, and does not merge so much as compound, 2 matching frequencies finding each other and producing something the wizarding world has no clean term for. A wave of red light rolls across the entire entrance to the Great Hall, broad and flat and absolute. And every Death Eater in the forward formation goes down simultaneously. The silence after is complete. Then everyone in the hall turns to look at the doorway. Then everyone turns to look at Fred on his stretcher, wand still raised. Expression of a man who has just made a strong argument. "See?" he tells Hermione. Hermione is trying not to smile. She fails. The Weasley family, for the first time in this war, fights in the same battle. Not tactically coordinated, not planned, but aware of each other in the way that only people who have shared a kitchen table for 20 years can be aware, always knowing where the others are, always fighting with the peripheral knowledge that the people they love are still standing. Percy, who has returned his brother to Pomfrey's care and returned to the fight, is unrecognizable from the man who spent 3 years behind a ministry desk. He is efficient and relentless, and fights with a fury that has been accumulating since the moment he understood what his loyalty to the wrong institutions had cost his family. Ginny fights with technical precision that makes older wizards stop and stare. She is 18 years old, and she has spent a year under the Carrows and a year before that in Dumbledore's army, and she has no patience left for anything, except ending this. Ron, bloody and exhausted and still standing, anchors a section of the hall entrance with the stubborn immovability of someone who has decided this is the line, and the line will hold. Charlie, who had crossed 2 countries in 2 days when word finally reached Romania, who could not stay away once he knew what night this was, fights at the left wall, unwilling to leave his family's side from the moment he arrived. Arthur Weasley, fighting alongside his wife for the first time in the war, is something none of his ministry colleagues have ever seen. Arthur, who loves Muggle artifacts and asks too many questions at dinner and laughs at his own jokes before he finishes telling them, Arthur, it turns out, fights like a man who has 7 children and a wife and a house held together with love and insufficient structural reinforcement, and he will not lose another inch of ground. Molly is beside him. Not the grief-hollowed Molly of the timeline where Fred dies. A different Molly entirely, one fighting from abundance rather than depletion. From the counted certainty of 7 living children rather than the raw wound of one taken. When Bellatrix Lestrange's killing curse narrowly misses Ginny, Molly steps forward. Her voice is quiet. That is the thing about it. Not the wild-pitched cry of a woman whose grief has burned away her restraint. Quiet. The voice of someone who has decided, with complete and final clarity, that this ends now. My children are alive today because of the people in this hall, Molly says. I will not let you touch them. The duel is technically superior to anything Bellatrix expects from her. Precise, controlled, the spellwork of a woman with everything to protect and nothing to prove. She does not need to destroy Bellatrix in a burst of emotion. She neutralizes her. Methodically, with the composed finality of someone who has already decided the outcome. Bellatrix Lestrange falls. Voldemort's face does something Harry will think about later. Not rage, not the theatrical fury he deploys as a weapon. Something underneath it, a crack in the architecture. This ordinary woman just ended his most powerful lieutenant without raising her voice. And the composure of it is more threatening to everything he has built than any display of power could be. The pivot comes when Neville Longbottom pulls the sword of Gryffindor from a burning hat. It is not graceful. Nothing about Neville has ever been graceful, and this is not the moment that changes that. He is singed and bleeding, and he has just been hit with something that should have kept him down and didn't. Because Neville Longbottom has been underestimated by people with more power than him his entire life, and has long since stopped being surprised by his own capacity to stand back up. The sword comes down in one arc. Nagini falls. The last Horcrux. The last anchor. The last thing standing between Voldemort and his own mortality. The Death Eater ranks falter. Not a rout. Not yet. But a hesitation. A fracture in the momentum. The first suggestion that the outcome of tonight is not the foregone conclusion they arrived believing. In the brief relative quiet of that moment, 5 seconds perhaps, the battle catching its breath. Arthur Weasley looks across the hall. Molly is alive. A curse graze on her shoulder, bleeding through her robes, and she is alive. He cannot reach her. There are still 20 feet of chaos between them. But she looks up at the same moment, and their eyes meet across the hall. Arthur looks at her. He counts. Bill, at the left wall. Charlie, who came when he heard, who has not left his family's side since he arrived. Percy, fighting near the doorway. Fred, in Pomfrey's station, wounded, breathing, alive. George, fighting with the particular ferocity of a man who knows exactly what tonight almost took from him. Ron, at the entrance, bloody and immovable. Ginny, at the far wall, still standing. He mouths 3 words. Molly reads them. They're all alive. Her hand goes to her mouth. Her eyes close for 1 second, just one. Because there is still fighting to be done and the Weasleys do not stop until the work is finished. But for that second, Molly Weasley receives the thing she has been bracing against losing since the first Death Eater attack, since the first name on the first list, since the first morning she woke up and counted her children before she was fully conscious, all 7. She opens her eyes, straightens, raises her wand. The battle continues. Harry finds the stone in his pocket at 3:47 in the morning. He knows the time because the clock in the entrance hall still works, indifferent to everything that has happened beneath it. And he glances at it on his way out of the castle because his mind is doing the thing it does when it is trying not to feel something, cataloging small, precise details, assigning them numbers, building a structure out of the measurable so there is somewhere to stand when everything else stops being solid. 3:47. The castle behind him is full of people doing the slow, terrible work of aftermath. He has done some of that work already, stood in the hall while people cried, answered questions he didn't have answers to, watched Madame Pomfrey move between the living with a focus that looked like calm, but was something older and less comfortable than calm. He has shaken hands with people whose names he doesn't know. He has said I don't know and yes and I'm sorry in different combinations, and none of the combinations have felt like enough. He is very tired. The stone is smooth and cool in his palm. The crack across the Hollows symbol where he dropped it in the forest, months ago, in another life, on a night when he thought he was walking to his death, and was mostly correct, has not changed. It sits in his hand and it is just a stone, until he turns it. Once, he does not go back inside. He stays at the edge of the tree line where the castle's light reaches but doesn't quite commit to, and he turns the stone, and the forest around him does something that has no comfortable name. His parents appear first. James and Lily, young in the way they will always be young, the way photographs are young. His mother's eyes, his father's hands. They are not solid. That is the thing about the resurrection stone that no one tells you, because no one who has used it at the right time has ever had the occasion to explain it properly. They are present in the way that certain memories are present, the ones that have enough weight to them that they seem to occupy physical space. They are there, fully there. And, looking at him, Sirius, Lupin, Harry looks at them, and the tiredness in him rearranges itself into something that doesn't have a clean category. It is not grief exactly, though grief is in it. It is the specific feeling of being loved by people you never got to keep, and knowing that the not keeping was not a failure of love on either side. We're close, his mother says. She means it the way she has always meant things, directly, without softening. We've been close the whole time. Harry believes her. He believed her the first time, in the forest, walking toward Voldemort's wand. He believes her more now, on the other side of that walk, when believing her costs him something different. I know, he says. His father is looking at him the way Harry has always imagined his father would look at him, which is to say with pride that doesn't need to announce itself. The quiet kind. James Potter, who was 17 once, and arrogant and brilliant, and is now forever 21. Looks at his son who has just done something that James Potter never had the chance to do. Finish it. And says nothing, because there is nothing to add. Sirius grins. It is the full grin. The one from the photographs, the one that Harry caught glimpses of in their last years together before Azkaban had finished what Azkaban had started on his godfather's face. It is the grin of the boy Sirius was before the world revised him, and seeing it now, Harry understands something he has been circling for a long time. They are not haunting him. They are attending him. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Are you? Harry starts. Yes, Sirius says. I didn't finish asking. You were going to ask if we're all right, Sirius says. We are. Are you? Harry considers this with the same seriousness he would apply to any question that deserves an honest answer. Not yet, he says. I think I will be. Lupin looks at him with the particular warmth of a man who spent years being careful about what he allowed himself to feel toward Harry, and then stopped being careful when it stopped being an option. You will be, Lupin says. And it is not reassurance. It is information, delivered by someone who has no remaining reason to be anything other than accurate. The forest is very still. Somewhere in the trees, a bird is making a sound that birds make before dawn, not singing exactly, just noting. Registering. The bird has no opinion about what happened tonight. The bird is simply marking the approach of morning, which is coming regardless. Which has been coming regardless, patient and entirely unbothered by the war. I have to let you go, Harry says. You've done it before, his mother says. Not unkindly. The way you say something true to someone you trust to hold it. I know. He pauses. I wanted to tell you that it's done. I wanted you to know. James looks at him for a long moment. We know, he says. Harry turns the stone back. The forest returns to being a forest. The bird continues noting the approach of morning. The cold is just cold now. Scottish May, damp, ordinary. The kind of cold that has no magical component and cannot be addressed with a wand. Harry closes his fingers around the stone and stands there for a moment in the dark, and allows himself, fully and without management, to feel the weight of what the night has cost. He doesn't collapse. He doesn't make a sound. He just stands there, a 17-year-old boy at the edge of a forest on the morning after the worst night of his life, and lets the weight be what it is. He hears her before he sees her. Not footsteps. Hermione has not made audible footsteps while moving through uncertain terrain since approximately September of last year. What he hears is her breath, which changes pattern slightly when she spots him, the small involuntary adjustment of someone whose body registers relief before their mind has fully processed what they're relieved about. She comes to stand beside him. She doesn't ask what he was doing. She looks at his closed fist, the stone, and she understands the shape of what just happened without requiring the content. This is one of the things about Hermione that Harry has stopped noticing because it is so constant. She does not need things explained to her. She needs them to be true, and if they are true, she finds them on her own. It is a quality that spent most of their first year being exhausting, and has gradually, over 7 years of increasingly impossible situations, become the most stabilizing thing in Harry's life. You should have the cloak back, she says. He takes it from her. The stone, she says, not a question, not a recommendation, just naming it. The way she names things when she wants them to exist in the space between two people rather than only inside one of them. I'm going to leave it here, Harry says, in the forest. She nods. Not because I don't want them, he says. Because I don't want to need them. She is quiet for a moment, thinking that through with the seriousness it deserves. That's the right reason, she says. He crouches down, presses the stone into the ground at the base of the nearest tree, into the soft, dark soil at the edge of where the roots begin. It goes in easily, like the earth was expecting it. He doesn't mark the spot. He doesn't make it findable. He stands up. They are standing very close together in the way that people who have spent a year in various small tents stand close without performing it. The proximity simply the default. The dark is thinning now at the edges, not light yet, but the specific reduction of dark that precedes light, the sky downgrading from black to the deep blue-gray of approaching morning. Hermione takes his hand, not in the way that means something it will need to be discussed later, just the grip of two people who have been keeping each other upright since they were 12 years old, and know the architecture of each other's hands well enough that the gesture requires no translation. Harry looks at the castle. All those lit windows, all those people, the great hall and the work of aftermath and the long necessary conversations that are going to happen in the coming days. The funerals, the rebuilding, the specific ongoing effort of living after surviving, which is different from survival and harder in ways that Harry doesn't have the shape of yet. Fred Weasley is in there. Breathing, George is counting ears and finding both present. Arthur is counting children and finding 7. Percy is still holding the canvas handles of a stretcher that a brother walked off, because Percy does not know yet how to put things down that he picked up under duress. Molly Weasley is making tea. Harry doesn't know this for certain. He infers it, because in his experience Molly Weasley's response to catastrophe has always been thermal and nourishing and immediate, and if there is a working kitchen anywhere in this castle tonight, she will have found it, and she will be standing over it making the strongest possible tea for the maximum possible number of people, because it is the thing she can do, and so she is doing it. He finds, unexpectedly, that he smiles. "Ready?" Hermione says. He looks at the forest behind them, the stone invisible in the dark soil, the birds still marking the approach of morning. "Yeah," Harry says. They walk back to the castle together. Their footsteps on the wet grass make no sound worth recording, just two people returning from the edge of something dark, moving toward light and warmth and the difficult ordinary business of the rest of their lives. The door opens. The smell of tea reaches them on the threshold. Harry was right about the tea. Harry comes back from the forest at 3:52 in the morning. He does not announce it. He simply walks out of the tree line and through the castle doors and into the entrance hall. And what he carries in his face is not something that can be described as an expression, because expressions belong to people who have not just done what he has done. He has been through a door and come back through it. He is changed in a way that will take years to fully understand. His scar is silent. That is the first thing. The absence where the foreign presence lived, the cold weight he has carried since he was 1 year old, is gone. The Horcrux in him died in the forest and did not take him with it, and the silence where it used to be is so complete that he can feel the shape of it. He keeps moving. Voldemort's voice fills the castle from the inside of every skull. Harry has heard this before, and the wrongness of it does not diminish with repetition. The voice says he is dead. The voice says it is over. The voice says come out and surrender and be spared. The Great Hall receives this in silence. Then Neville Longbottom says, clearly and without particular volume, "No." One word. It lands in the hall the way a lit match lands. Not explosive, immediate. Several people stand up. Several wands come out. Something that was held breath becomes held spine, and the spine straightens. Harry steps through the doorway. The hall sees him. The reaction is not cheering. Not yet. It is something prior to cheering, the specific paralysis of people whose minds are refusing to process what their eyes are showing them. Harry Potter, who Voldemort just announced was dead, is standing in the entrance of the Great Hall with the cloak over one arm and his wand at his side, and he is very clearly, very thoroughly, alive. Then it is cheering. Harry is not looking at the crowd. He is looking at Voldemort, who stands at the far end of the hall with the Elder Wand loose in his fingers, and an expression that has developed in the last 8 seconds, a quality it has never contained before. Uncertainty. But before Harry reaches him, before the circle forms, before the final thing begins, Voldemort's eyes move. They move to Fred Weasley. Fred, who is not on the stretcher anymore. Fred, who discharged himself from Pomfrey's care approximately 90 seconds after Pomfrey's back was turned, who is standing against the left wall with his arm in the splint, and George beside him, pale as quarry stone and absolutely present. Fred, who in every version of tonight that Voldemort calculated should be a body in a 7th-floor corridor. He is not a body. He is standing upright, eyes open, watching Voldemort with the flat, clear regard of someone who has already decided how this ends. Voldemort looks at him for 2 full seconds. What passes across his face is not something he would allow in public if he could prevent it. He cannot prevent it, because he is not prepared for it. Because his entire architecture of the world has no category for this specific image, the accumulation of his failures standing upright and breathing. The chosen one, returned from death, the twin that the wall should have taken, the unbroken things. He is afraid. Lord Voldemort, who has not been afraid since he was Tom Riddle in an orphanage, afraid of the dark and the end of things, is afraid. And the fear is worse than it was then, because then he had no power and now he has all of it and it is still not enough, and that means something he cannot name and will not have time to. Fred moves first, not toward Voldemort, toward Harry. He crosses the hall without asking anyone's permission, George 1 step behind, the two of them moving through the crowd with the particular ease of people who have been navigating rooms together since before they could walk, and takes his position to Harry's left. George takes his position to Harry's right. They do not look at each other. They do not discuss it. They stand back to back to back, the 3 of them. And something happens that has no proper name in the wizarding world's current vocabulary, something that will be argued about in academic papers for the next 40 years, and never fully resolved. The air in the immediate vicinity does not change temperature. It does not produce light or sound. What it does is something more subtle and more total. It settles. Like the air after a long storm. Like the quality of silence in a room where something true has just been said. Dark magic cast in their direction falters. Not deflects. Not redirects. Falters. Loses its momentum at the source. The way a flame loses its momentum in a sealed room. The way certainty loses its shape when it meets something it cannot account for. Voldemort casts. The killing curse leaves his wand, the Elder Wand, his prize, his proof, and enters the resonance field and does not stop, but slows by the fraction of a second that Harry needs. Harry casts Expelliarmus. Not a combat spell. Not a killing spell. The disarming charm, the spell he has always used, the spell everyone told him was insufficient, the spell that is not about destruction, but about ending. The spells meet in the space between them. What happens next takes less than 1 second, and will be described differently by every person in the room who witnesses it. Some will say there was light. Some will say there was a sound like stone splitting cleanly. Most will simply say they felt it. A pressure in the chest. A single massive beat. The sensation of something being resolved that has been unresolved for 50 years. The Elder Wand knows its master. The curse returns. Tom Riddle, born 1926, raised in an orphanage, brilliant and unloved and unwilling to accept the terms of being human, dies the way he has always feared. Not in a blaze of power. Not in a meaningful confrontation between equals. Quietly, finally. The long-held breath of the wizarding world releasing in one moment, and the darkness simply stopping, the way darkness always stops when the thing generating it is gone. He falls. The hall goes completely still. 3 seconds of it. The specific silence of people waiting to be certain. Waiting for the body to be a body. Waiting for the absence of threat to be real. Waiting for permission to believe that the worst night of recent memory has just actually ended. Then Fred Weasley says, "Well, that was dramatic." The hall laughs. Not everyone. There are people in this room in too much pain for laughter. People who have lost something tonight that laughter cannot reach. But enough. Enough people laugh that it breaks the 3-second silence into pieces. And the pieces release everything that has been held back since the wall came down on the 7th floor, since Nagini fell, since Harry stepped back through the entrance hall doors and proved that some things refuse to stay dead. Someone laughs so hard they sit down on the floor. Someone else is crying and laughing at the same time. The body doing what it does when it has been running on fear long enough that relief and grief arrive together and cannot be sorted at the door. Minerva McGonagall, who has held this school upright through a year of occupation through sheer force of will and principle, sits down in a chair someone has the presence of mind to conjure behind her. And the sound she makes is the most undignified thing that has ever left her throat in 40 years of teaching. Harry turns to look at Fred. "Dramatic," he says. "Enormous amount of purple smoke," Fred confirms. "Highly theatrical. 0 points for originality." Harry looks at him, this man who was horizontal on a stretcher 2 hours ago. This man who has 3 cracked ribs and a shattered arm and nerve damage they haven't fully assessed yet. This man who should not be upright, and is upright anyway. Because Fred Weasley has never once in his life allowed the reasonable limits of a situation to determine what he does in it. He puts his arms around him. Carefully, because of the ribs. Both arms around Fred's good side, avoiding the splinted arm, and Fred's right hand comes up and grips the back of Harry's robes the way it gripped his hand in the corridor. The grip of someone establishing that something is real. The grip of someone who has felt the cold edge and been pulled back, and is still, 6 hours later checking, still here. Still here. Still here. "It's over," Harry says, into Fred's shoulder. No performance. No audience. Just the words. Said because they need to be said aloud by someone. Said because 7 years and a scar and a cupboard under the stairs and all of it has led to this corridor of the Great Hall at 4 a.m. And it is over. "Yeah," Fred says. His voice is rough and quiet, and nothing in it is a joke. We know. George, beside them, says nothing. He puts his hand on the back of Fred's head. 3 seconds. Then he steps back and clears his throat and says, "Right. I'm going to find Mum before she finds the body and thinks you've relapsed." Fred huffs a laugh. It catches on his ribs and he winces and laughs anyway. Outside, through the blown-out windows of the great hall, the sky is beginning its slow, indifferent move toward morning. Molly Weasley counts her children at 5:14 in the morning. She does it quietly, without moving from her seat in the center of the great hall, without drawing attention to herself. She simply looks at each one in turn, the way she has looked at them every morning of her life, from the doorway of a bedroom, across a breakfast table, through the window of the Hogwarts Express, the specific maternal inventory that never gets easier, and never becomes routine, no matter how many years you perform it. Bill and Fleur, pressed together against a far pillar, Bill's scarred face slack in sleep, Fleur's silver hair loose across his shoulder, both breathing. Charlie, who crossed 2 countries in 2 days when word reached Romania, is crouched beside Ron with one hand on his shoulder. Charlie, who missed the worst of it and will carry that guilt for years regardless of what anyone tells him. Breathing, Percy, asleep sitting upright with his glasses still on and a dried bloodstain on his collar that is not his own blood. Breathing, Fred. Madame Pomfrey has conjured a proper hospital cot from somewhere and positioned it against the left wall, away from the drafts. Fred is in it with the particular density of someone under heavy magical sedation. Skelly Grow working through the night on his arm. The bone-deep exhaustion of significant trauma, finally overruling everything Fred Weasley has ever thought about rest. His left arm is in a proper cast now. His chest rises and falls with the slow steadiness of deep sleep. Beside him, in a conjured chair, George, asleep. Finally. It took until 4 a.m., Molly knows, because she watched him refuse to close his eyes for 2 hours after Fred was settled. His hand and Fred's hand are loosely connected in the space between the chair and the cot. Not gripping, just resting. Just maintaining the contact. George's left side. The absence there, the ear he lost and never got back and never will. 2 things Fred still has because of a 3-second window and Hermione Granger's reflexes. Breathing, Ron. Asleep against the wall with Hermione beside him, her head on his shoulder, both of them unconscious in the absolute way of people whose bodies have simply switched off. Hermione's bag is still over her shoulder. Even in sleep she has not let go of it. Breathing. Breathing. Ginny is not asleep. Ginny has not slept, and will not sleep. Not yet. She is sitting cross-legged a few feet from Ron, her wand across her knees and a piece of parchment in her hands, reading something she has been writing for the past hour in the small, careful script she reserves for things that matter. She looks up and finds Molly looking at her. She doesn't say anything. Neither does Molly. 7. Molly has done the count and the number is 7, and it is the number it has always been and should always be, and she sits with that number in her chest and does not move for a long moment. Arthur finds her just as the first light reaches the high windows. He sits beside her without ceremony, without asking whether she wants company, because in 38 years of marriage he has learned that Molly in a quiet room at dawn needs presence, not language. He takes her hand. They sit together and look at the hall. The injured, the sleeping, the slow movements of Pomfrey between them. The torches burning down. The ceiling beginning its first subtle shift from black to something marginally less dark. I thought, Molly says, very quietly. The voice she uses when something is too large for a normal volume. When I heard the explosion. When Percy came running. I thought we were. I know, Arthur says. I thought that was it. I thought we were one of those families. Arthur looks at Fred asleep in the cot. At George's hand and Fred's hand, resting. We almost were, he says. Because Arthur Weasley has always believed that the truth is worth the discomfort of saying it plainly. But we aren't. No, Molly is quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere past the blown-out windows, a bird has decided that the approaching morning is worth noting. It is a very ordinary bird making a very ordinary sound, and Molly Weasley fixes on it the way a person fixes on small ordinary things when the large extraordinary thing is too much to hold all at once. "Arthur," she says, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me we don't go back to Sunday dinners and act as though this was." She stops. Starts again. "Promise me we don't let it become a story we tell at Christmas. Something that happened once and then receded. I want us to remember it properly. I want us to carry it." Arthur looks at her. "Who we almost lost," he says slowly. "No." Molly shakes her head. "Who we kept." He holds her gaze for a long moment. Then he lifts her hand and presses it briefly to his cheek and says nothing. Because some things Arthur Weasley knows better than to try to improve upon with words. The sun clears the mountains at 6:07. Harry is sitting on the front steps of the castle when it happens. He has not slept. He does not expect to sleep for some time, and has made a private peace with this fact, because sleep requires a certain relationship with the inside of your own head and the inside of his head, is currently a place that needs some significant reorganization before it will be fit for habitation. The grounds are quiet in the specific way of places where something enormous has happened, and the enormity has not yet fully settled. The lake is still. The sky is doing what it has always done, turning gold and rose and enormous and continuous, unbothered. The sky going about its ancient daily business with the serene indifference of something that has outlasted everything that has ever tried to stop it. Hermione sits down beside him. She is carrying 2 cups of tea. She does not explain where they came from. He does not ask. He takes his cup and wraps both hands around it, and they sit together on the cold stone steps and watch the sun come up. For a long time, neither of them speaks. The tea is strong, stronger than is strictly advisable. The kind of tea that someone makes when function is more important than flavor. It is exactly right. "What do you want to do today?" Hermione asks. Her voice is unhurried. No agenda in it. Harry thinks about this with the seriousness it deserves. "Nothing," he says. "For about a week. Just nothing." Hermione considers this. "That's the most reasonable thing you've ever said." A small silence. The bird from earlier, or a different bird, it doesn't matter, is still going about its business in the trees beyond the grounds. "What happens after nothing?" Harry asks. "We fix things," Hermione says, not dramatically, the way you say something you have already decided. "All the parts we can reach. There's a great deal to fix." "I know. I've been keeping a list since 5th year. I know that too." He looks at her sidelong. "How long is it?" "Long," she says. Then, after a pause, "But we have time now." "That's the difference. We have time." Harry turns this over. The specific, extraordinary, previously unavailable fact of having time. He has been living in a permanent state of imminence for so long that the absence of it feels strange, a missing weight, like putting down something heavy that has left its shape in your muscles. He looks at the castle behind them, the damage visible even from here, the blown-out windows, the scorched stone. The section of tower that will need significant work before it is structurally sound. Still standing, battered and ancient, and entirely stubbornly standing. He thinks about Fred asleep in the hall. About the tremors in Fred's left hand that Hermione noticed while she was working on him and said nothing about, because there was too much else to address. But Harry saw her file it. He thinks about George's face in the corridor, the sound George made when Fred opened his eyes. He thinks about what it cost, what the night cost and what it almost cost, and the 3-second margin that is the difference between those two things. He finds, quietly and without announcement, that he is grateful. Not the performed gratitude of someone saying the right words, but the deep bodily kind, the kind that sits behind the sternum and does not have a clean expression. Ginny comes outside 20 minutes later. She is still carrying the parchment. She sits on the step below Harry and Hermione and looks at the morning for a moment. Then she reads. It is a list, just names. She reads them quietly, almost to herself, not performing it, not making a speech of it. She has been writing it since 3 a.m. She has been adding to it whenever she confirmed someone breathing. Every person who fought last night. every person currently alive. It is long. It is so much longer than any of them, in the darkest hours of the night, had allowed themselves to hope. When she finishes, she folds it carefully. Twice, the particular fold of something being preserved rather than discarded. She puts it in her pocket. She looks up at Harry and Hermione, and her face in the early morning light is 18 years old and older than that simultaneously. The face of someone who has already carried more than 18-year-olds should carry, and has carried it anyway, and is still here. Evidence, Ginny says. In case anyone forgets. She goes back inside. Harry looks at the space where she was sitting. The sun is fully up now. The lake catches the light and holds it. Somewhere in the castle, the ordinary business of survival is underway. Pomfrey working, tea being made, people slowly waking to the first morning of whatever comes next. Hermione finishes her tea. Right, she says. Quietly, just to herself, or to Harry, or to the morning. Right, the shop is intact. This is the thing George was not prepared for. He expected damage, broken windows, looted shelves, the particular entropy of a place that has been left alone during a war. Instead, the charms held. Every ward Fred and George placed in the spring of 1997. When the signs were unmistakable, and they spent 3 evenings reinforcing every inch of the building, held through everything. The shop is intact. The stock is dusty. The window display is 7 months out of date. But the building is standing, and undamaged, and George stands on the pavement outside it in the first week of June, and cannot make himself go in. He goes upstairs instead. He has been going upstairs instead for 3 weeks. The apartment above the shop is not quiet in the way that empty places are quiet. It is quiet in a specific, personal way, the quiet of a place that was built for 2 people and currently contains 1. The second mug is still in the cabinet. The armchair Fred claimed in their second year of living here. The one with the broken left armrest that Fred said gave it character and George said was a fire hazard, is still positioned at its angle to the window. George does not move it. Fred is in Devon, at the Burrow, recovering. His arm is healing. His ribs are healing. Molly is feeding him at 4-hour intervals with the focused intensity of a woman who has decided that nutrition is something she can control when most things are not. Fred calls every evening on the Muggle phone they bought 3 years ago as a joke and have used constantly since. The calls last anywhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours. Fred complains about Skele Grow. George makes jokes about it. They talk about the shop, about what they want to change, about the new products Fred has been sketching in a notebook while bedridden, because Fred Weasley's idea of convalescence is lateral thinking. They talk about nothing. They talk about everything. It is fine. It is almost fine. But 5% of George Weasley, in the dark of the apartment at 3 a.m., is still kneeling on a 7th-floor corridor floor with his arms around his brother, and that 5% does not sleep. Lee Jordan lets himself in on a Tuesday in late June. He has a key. He has had a key since 4th year. He uses it without knocking, because he and George have always operated on the understanding that knocking is for strangers. And whatever they are, after a year of Lee broadcasting coded resistance messages to a fractured wizarding world while George ran a joke shop through a war, they are not strangers. George is at the kitchen table. It is 3 p.m. He is eating cereal without milk, reading nothing, looking at nothing with the focused attention of someone whose thoughts are somewhere considerably darker than the kitchen. Lee sits down. He does not say "you look terrible," which is true. He does not say "how are you," which is unanswerable. He takes a bowl from the cabinet, pours cereal, eats it dry in silence beside George. 4 minutes pass. Then George says he almost died. "I know," Lee says. "Everyone says but he didn't. And I know he didn't. He calls every night, and he's annoying and alive, and I know." Lee waits. He has always been good at waiting. It is what made him good on the radio. The understanding that silence, correctly held, is also communication. "But I can still feel it," George says. That moment in the battle. Something went wrong with the frequency. He stops. Starts again with the care of someone trying to be precise about something that resists precision. "You know how a tuning fork works?" "Yeah, 2 forks, matched you strike one, the other vibrates. Always. Automatically. That's just what they do. He looks at his hands on the table. In the corridor. When the wall came down, my fork went, it didn't stop. But it went wrong. One note, wrong, for about 3 seconds. He pauses. I didn't know 3 seconds could be that long. Lee doesn't say anything. I thought that was what the rest of my life felt like, George says. Without him. I stood there and I thought, this is it. This is the frequency from now on. 1 fork, 1 note. Half the sound. I thought, he stops, his jaw tightens. I thought I'd been cut loose. Like someone had cut my shadow off, and I was still standing there, but nothing I did was going to cast right anymore. Does that make any sense? He says. Not a question. Yes, Lee says simply. The same 2 syllables he always uses when George says something true that other people might complicate. Just, yes. I hear you. Continue, but he's fine, George says, and the words are slightly too flat. He's going to be fine. Arms healing. Ribs are healing. He calls every day. He's fine. You're allowed to not be, Lee says. Even when he is. George looks at him. His recovery and your recovery, Lee says, are not the same event. George looks back at his hands. A long moment passes during which the kitchen does its neutral work around them. The refrigerator hums. The afternoon light moves across the table. London goes about its ordinary human business 6 floors below. I know, George says eventually. It sounds like something arriving rather than something he already had. The mirror is in the hallway. They bought it for the shop in their first year. A full-length glass in a gilt frame, practical for customers trying on joke robes and novelty hats. It was too heavy to carry back down the stairs, so it stayed in the hallway. And it has been there for 4 years. And George has walked past it every day for 4 years, without giving it particular thought. He stops in front of it one evening in late July. He looks at himself. His own face looks back. His face. Not a version of Fred's face. Not the other half of a matched set. Not the mirror image that photographers always oriented toward Fred at the center. Just George Weasley, 20 years old, missing 1 ear, tired in a way that sleep has not fully addressed in 2 months. He stands there for a while. He understands this now, standing here in his hallway at 9 p.m. with no particular reason to have stopped. He has been so focused on Fred's survival that he has not once asked what he nearly lost. Not Fred. That is Fred's near loss. Fred's to carry. What George nearly lost is something different and more interior. He nearly lost the part of himself that functions. Not the comedy. Not the ideas. Not the surface things. The part of himself that is oriented. The part that has a direction, and a frequency, and a reason for the direction and the frequency. The part that knows which way to point. He looks at the mirror and he sees, for the first time, with the clean sight of someone who has been made to confront something, rather than maneuver around it. Just himself. One person. Present, dented, still casting. He goes to the phone and calls Fred. The call lasts 2 hours. Fred talks about a new product concept. A weather-predictive suite that changes flavor based on barometric pressure, which he has been developing in his notebook, and which George immediately identifies 3 improvements to. They argue about the improvements. Fred concedes 2 and refuses the 3rd on aesthetic grounds. George calls him an idiot. Fred agrees cheerfully. George does not mention the mirror. He doesn't have to. Fred, somewhere in Devon, goes quiet at exactly the right moments. He has always known when George is saying something important by what George is not saying, and tonight the unsaid thing is large and private and Fred holds space for it without naming it, which is the right thing to do, and Fred knows it is the right thing to do, and that knowledge between them is its own kind of language. They hang up at midnight. George washes both mugs, goes to bed, sleeps until 6 a.m. Fred comes back to London on a Saturday in late September. He arrives at the apartment with his arm out of the cast, healed. Largely, the bones solid again. The nerve damage in his hand settled into what the healer at St. Mungo's described as a permanent but manageable tremor, which Fred has decided to call a distinguishing feature. He comes through the door with his bag over his good shoulder and stops, taking in the apartment. The unchanged furniture, the second mug in the cabinet, the armchair at its angle to the window. "Did you do anything while I was gone?" he asks. "Emotional growth," George says. Fred looks at him for a moment. Whatever he sees in George's face, the specific quality of someone who has been through something interior and come out the other side not unscathed, but oriented, he receives without comment. "Counts," Fred says. He drops his bag, goes to the kitchen, puts the kettle on. George sits down in his armchair. The afternoon light comes through the window at the angle it has always come through at this time of day. From the kitchen there is the sound of Fred opening the cabinet, taking out both mugs, setting them on the counter. The kettle begins its work. The apartment sounds, for the first time in 4 months, like the correct size. The ministry desk jobs last 8 months. Fred works in the Department of Magical Games and Sports, in a sub-office that handles permit applications for domestic Quidditch matches, which means he spends 6 hours a day reading paperwork about the administrative classification of broomstick modifications and trying not to let anyone see how much he is dying inside. George works 2 floors up in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, which Fred points out is at least accurately named. They arrive together every morning. They leave together every evening. They walk from the ministry to Diagon Alley in approximately 12 minutes, and they spend every hour until midnight in the shop. This is the real work. The shop needs 6 months of it. Not structural repair, the ward's held, and the building is sound. What it needs is restocking, redesigning, and in one significant section, complete reinvention. The post-war market for jokes is different from the pre-war market. People still want to laugh. People want to laugh more desperately than they ever did before. But what they need the laughter to do has changed. And Fred and George are precise enough craftsmen to understand that a product which cannot read its moment is not a product, it is just an object. They spend October identifying what the moment requires. They spend November and December building the answer. The invention that emerges from those 2 months begins as a working note titled, simply, Emotional Response Lamp, Prototype. It goes through 11 iterations. The first 3 are failures. The 4th produces light in response to emotional stimulus but cannot distinguish between different emotional states, which makes it produce a consistent greenish yellow that George describes as the color of mild indigestion. Iterations 5 through 9 narrow the diagnostic sensitivity. Iteration 10 finally achieves the full spectrum. Grief produces a deep amber, the color of old firelight, the color of something warm that has been burning down. Fear produces a cold silver, not unpleasant, just precise, like the light before a storm that has not yet decided to arrive. Happiness produces a gold-orange warmth, the uncomplicated light of a summer afternoon. And love, not happiness, not contentment, not the general warmth of a pleasant moment. Love, specifically, the large and specific kind. The kind that knows its object and would not be satisfied by any substitute, produces a color that neither Fred nor George can account for, technically. A deep, clear violet blue. The depth of late evening sky. The specific shade of something that should not be as beautiful as it is. They test it on everyone they can get to stand near it. Molly makes it go violet blue immediately and looks slightly embarrassed about it. Arthur makes it go violet blue and looks extremely unsurprised. Lee Jordan makes it go gold orange and argues that this should have been violet blue, and Fred tells him he is misreading his own emotional state, which starts a 40-minute debate that resolves nothing. Harry and Hermione stand near it together, and it goes violet blue before either of them has fully registered that they are in the room. Nobody comments on this. Fred writes Hope Lamp on the final product label and does not explain the name to anyone who asks. The explanation is too long and too private, and the lamp itself does the explaining better than he ever could. The queue on reopening morning stretches from the shop entrance to the far end of Diagon Alley, around the corner, and 15 feet into the side street beside Madame Malkin's. Fred and George stand inside the closed door at 9:58 a.m. and look at it through the window. "Right," Fred says. "Right," George says. They look at each other. The specific look that has no name because it has never needed one. the look that carries everything they have been to each other, and everything the last 12 months have been, and the 6 months before that, and the 7 years before that. The whole accumulated weight of being Fred and George, which is a thing distinct from being Fred and being George separately, though it contains both. Fred's left hand, at his side, is trembling with its small persistent tremor. He opens the door. The crowd floods in. They are not just children. This is what catches Fred first. In the opening minutes. The ages. Parents with children, yes, and young people who want something to laugh at, yes, but also a woman in her 60s who buys a hope lamp without looking at the price and holds it to her chest as she walks out, the amber in it shifting slowly to violet blue as she stands in the doorway. A man who served in the order, who lost his brother in the First War and has spent the Second War watching his son grow up in the shadow of the same darkness, who stands in the middle of the shop and turns in a slow circle, looking at the shelves, with an expression that has nothing to do with wanting to purchase anything. Former Hogwarts students. The ones who spent a year under the Carrows, who spent a year being taught that cruelty was curriculum, who come in now in pairs and threes, and stand near the trick sweets and the self-inking quills, and the extendable ears, and remember when this shop was proof that the world could still be a specific kind of ridiculous. The hope lamps in every window are all violet blue before 10:15. The girl is 7, maybe 8. She has her mother's hand in one of hers and a chocolate frog card in the other, and she stops in front of the hope lamp display, in the center of the shop, with the total, present focus that children bring to things that interest them, which is different from adult interest, because it contains no performance. The lamp nearest to her goes violet blue. She looks at it for a long moment. Then she looks up at Fred, who is nearest, finishing a transaction at the counter. "Why did it do that?" she asks. Fred comes around the counter. He crouches down to her level, which puts him at considerable personal inconvenience given what his ribs went through 8 months ago, and have mostly but not entirely forgiven him for. His left hand rests on his knee. The tremor is present, the fine persistent movement that has settled into him like a habit. The girl looks at it with the direct, guileless interest of someone who has not yet learned to pretend not to notice things. "It means you're feeling love," Fred says. "The lamp can tell." She looks at the lamp, looks at her hand holding her mother's hand, looks at the chocolate frog card, looks at the shop around her with its absurd, impossible, entirely serious commitment to the idea that joy is not a luxury. "What am I loving?" she asks, genuinely wanting to know. Fred looks around the shop. He looks at George behind the counter, conducting 4 transactions simultaneously with the competence of someone who has been doing this since age 17. He looks at the queue still stretching out the door, at the hope lamps doing their steady violet work in every window, at the woman in her 60s standing in the doorway still holding her lamp to her chest, at the former Hogwarts students laughing at something in the corner. He looks at the girl. "Hard to say," he tells her. "You might have to figure that one out yourself." She considers this with the seriousness of someone who will in fact figure it out herself, possibly before she leaves the shop. Then she nods once, and pulls her mother toward the skiving snack boxes with the purposeful stride of a person who has decided what they want. The last customer leaves at 6. Fred locks the door. The key is the same key they have used since they opened. It sticks slightly in the lock, has always stuck slightly in the lock, will presumably stick slightly in the lock until the building itself decides it has had enough. Fred has never oiled the mechanism, and George has never asked him to, and this is a small piece of continuity that means more than it reasonably should. He turns around. The shop is theirs again. The quiet version, the after-hours version, the version that belongs to nobody but them. The shelves slightly depleted from the day's trade, the floor needing a sweep. The hope lamps still on, all of them, doing their patient violet work in every corner and window. The whole shop is violet blue. Fred and George stand in the middle of it, and look around at what they built. The shop they opened at 17 on borrowed gold and audacity, that survived a war mostly by not being in the path of the worst of it, that has been waiting under its own charms for them to come back. The place that is not just a business, and has never been just a business. It is an argument. It is a 4-story argument on Diagon Alley that the world can be funnier than it is, and the people in it can be kinder than they are. And laughter is not a failure to take things seriously. It is a specific way of taking them seriously that other methods cannot replicate. Fred holds up his left hand. He looks at it. The tremor. The small, permanent, manageable fact of it. The hand that absorbed the stone so the rest of him didn't have to. The hand that will shake for the rest of his life as a reminder that 3 seconds is both a very short and a very long amount of time. George reaches over and takes it. Not to still it. Not to fix it. Just holds it. Both of them looking at it the way you look at something that cost you something, which is different from how you look at things that didn't. The tremor continues, small and present, between their joined hands. Right. Fred says. George waits. Let's do this again tomorrow. Fred is in the Burrow kitchen at 5 a.m. with 47 note cards. He has arranged them in 4 different orders over the past hour, and none of the orders feel right. And he has decided that the order is not actually the problem. The problem is that he has been writing this speech in his head for 3 years, and now that it needs to come out of his head and become a thing that happens in front of 200 people, he is aware, with a clarity that the darkness and the quiet and the nervous energy of 5 a.m. provides, that it has to be exactly right. His left hand holds the stack of cards. The tremor moves through them, a faint shuffle at irregular intervals. He sorts with his right. Arthur comes downstairs at 5:30. He takes in the kitchen, the tea already made, the cards on the table, Fred's particular quality of stillness, which is different from ordinary stillness because it is Fred, and stillness is not his natural state, and makes no comment. He pours 2 cups and sits down. How long is it? Arthur asks. 12 minutes. Arthur raises an eyebrow. George timed it, Fred says. 12 minutes, 14 seconds, including 2 audience participation sections. Fred. The second one is optional. Crowd dependent. Arthur wraps both hands around his mug. Outside the kitchen window, the garden is dark and the gnomes are inactive, and the night is finishing its slow work of becoming morning. You're nervous, he says. Fred looks at his note cards. It's Harry, he says, as though this explains everything. Because it does. Of course I'm nervous. It has to be. He stops. His jaw tightens slightly. It has to be good, Dad. It has to actually be good. Arthur reaches over and puts his hand over Fred's trembling one, holds it there. The tremor continues underneath his palm, small and persistent. It'll be good, Arthur says. It's yours. Of course it'll be good. Fred looks at his father's hand over his. He nods once, the small private nod of someone receiving something they needed and didn't know how to ask for. He picks up his note cards. The marquee in June light is something out of a dream that knows it's a dream and decides to commit to it anyway. Ginny reads from a Muggle poem Hermione chose. Her voice is steady and low, and everyone in the marquee goes quiet in a way that is different from the polite quiet of ceremony, the real quiet of people genuinely listening to something true. Ron's face when Hermione walks in is private in the way that only accidental things are private. He looks, for one unguarded second, like a man who has known someone his entire adult life and is only now, in this specific light, understanding the full shape of what that means. Then he looks at the floor and composes himself, and when he looks up again he is smiling with his whole face. Molly Weasley cries from the moment the music starts. She has decided apparently that she has earned this, and she is right. Harry's face when he sees Hermione is not a thing that can be usefully described. It is simply his face, doing something that Harry's face does not do in public, and is doing now because he has stopped being able to prevent it. Fred's speech begins exactly as everyone expects. He thanks the catering staff on behalf of anyone who has ever eaten at the Burrow, and understands the particular achievement of feeding this many people. He presents a brief historical analysis of Harry Potter's fashion choices between 1991 and 1994, which requires a visual aid he produces from inside his robes. He describes, from the twins' operational perspective, Harry's first year at Hogwarts, specifically the Night of the Troll, which Fred and George heard about secondhand from Percy and have been dining out on for a decade. The Marquis laughs. It is the deep, grateful laughter of people who came here wanting to laugh and are being given exactly that. Then, At the 6-minute mark, something shifts. It is not dramatic. Fred's voice does not break or drop. It simply becomes quieter, and the quietness draws the Marquis in like a change in air pressure. "I want to tell you about a night," Fred says. He pauses. The 47 note cards are in his pocket. He stopped looking at them 3 minutes ago. May 2nd, 1998. I was in a corridor on the 7th floor of Hogwarts with my brother Percy, who had just made a joke, and if you know Percy you understand the significance of this, and then there was a great deal of dust and noise and I was on the floor. He stops. I want to be clear that I have never told this story publicly before. The ministry has requested we all be vague about that night for approximately 5 more years, so I'll keep it brief. A small laugh from the crowd. Tension and release. I was on the floor, Fred continues, and I was confused. And I tasted blood. And then I heard Harry's voice. Somewhere nearby. And I thought, well, he's not dead, so at least we're ahead of schedule. He lets the laugh come and go. And then I looked at the ceiling and I thought, I'm not dead either. And that seemed, at the time, like too much luck for one night. Silence, the complete, held kind. And then I thought, no, not luck. Because Harry Potter is not a lucky person. Lucky people do not have the childhoods he had. Lucky people do not carry what he carried for 17 years. What Harry Potter is, Fred looks at Harry, direct and unperformed, is loved. And that is not the same thing at all. He turns to Hermione. That's you, he says. That is specifically, precisely you. The difference between surviving and being loved while you do it. He holds her gaze. I watched you keep me alive on a stone floor so I could be standing here. I know I didn't say it then. I was concussed, and your name is not something I can say without my voice doing something I'd prefer to avoid in front of this many people. But I have been preparing this speech since the night you and Harry did something impossible for me. Since the night I understood what it looks like when someone with everything to lose chooses to use it for someone else instead. The Marquis is completely still. I have been preparing it because I knew this moment was coming. I knew Harry Potter, who has never once in his life been straightforwardly allowed to want something, was going to want this woman, and I knew she was going to want him back, because she has always seen him clearly, without the legend, without any of it. Just Harry. He pauses. And I knew when they found their way to each other, I was going to be the one to stand up and say, this is what love looks like. Fred looks at the note cards he has not needed, not the easy kind, the kind that shows up with bandages and the correct potion at the correct moment, the kind that stands at the edge of something terrible and says, I cannot go with you, but I am not leaving. The kind that does not calculate, the kind that does not stop. He raises his glass. Thank you, Fred says. Just that, to Hermione, for keeping all of us. Hermione stands up. It is not in the program. It is not planned. It is the response of a person whose body has decided that sitting is the wrong answer to what was just said. She walks to Fred, across the marquee in her wedding dress, ignoring the 200 people watching, and puts both arms around him. Fred, surprised, wraps his right arm around her back. The marquee is very quiet. Harry is smiling with his whole face, the complete, unguarded version that he saves for specific people in specific moments. Ron, from his seat, says, Oi. I thought that was going to be funny. Fred, over Hermione's shoulder, finds Ron across the marquee. Surprise elements, he says. Chapter 7 of Advanced Comedy Theory. George, beside Ron, is looking at the ceiling with his jaw set in the way of someone who has decided they are absolutely not going to cry at a wedding when they have already cried twice today and once in the car on the way here. He is not succeeding. James Sirius Potter is 4 months old and extremely opinionated about being held by strangers. He has communicated this opinion clearly, repeatedly, and at volume to everyone at the Burrow Christmas gathering who has attempted to take him from Harry or Hermione. He has opinions about his blanket. He has opinions about the angle of the light. He is small enough to fit in one arm and large enough in personality to fill a room, which Fred recognizes immediately as a quality worth cultivating. Give him here, Fred says. Hermione looks at him. The look contains, he has been crying for 20 minutes. He has rejected 11 people, are you certain? Give him here, Fred says again. Harry hands him over with the expression of a man who has been awake since 4 in the morning and will accept any offered alternative. Fred takes James Sirius with the careful, deliberate slowness of someone handling something that matters. Left hand under the baby's head, right hand under the small weight of him. His left hand trembles, the permanent fine tremor that has been there since May of 1998, and will be there until Fred is old enough that no one will remember when it started. James Sirius, who has been objecting loudly to the world for the better part of an hour, stops crying. He looks at Fred with the enormous dark eyes he has taken from his mother. Harry's hair, already improbable on someone this recently born, stands up in 3 directions. He looks at Fred's face with the total, present attention of someone encountering something new and determining its significance. Fred looks back at him. The tremor moves through his left hand at its small, irregular intervals. James Sirius's gaze travels to it. He watches it for a moment. The fine, persistent movement. The hand that shakes, whether Fred wants it to or not. Then, with the decisive action of someone who has made a decision, he wraps both his hands around Fred's trembling finger and holds on. The tremor continues underneath the baby's grip. James Sirius tightens his hold slightly and looks up at Fred as though this arrangement is perfectly satisfactory, which is the most sensible position anyone has taken on the matter in 6 years. Fred looks at this for a long time. He looks up at Harry, who is watching from across the room with the expression of a man who recognizes something is happening but cannot fully name it. "I'll teach him everything," Fred says. "Please don't," Harry says. The map. The passages. The optimal approach to a fanged frisbee in a confined space, which has a lot of applications, Fred. The Marauder tradition is a legacy, Harry. It requires stewardship. You can't just let it lapse because you've become responsible. "I'm serious. I know you are," Fred says, looking back at James Sirius. "That's why you need me." Over the next 6 years, Fred keeps this vow. Not loudly. Not with announcements or formal occasions. The way Fred Weasley keeps most of his vows, which is quietly and with total commitment and jokes at every available juncture to prevent anyone from noticing how seriously he means it. He annotates the Marauders map, his and George's copy, the one they have maintained since first year, with 6 years of additions. New patrol patterns. Revised passage timings. A small legend in the margin that notes which teachers have improved their detection methods and which ones have gotten lazier about the first-floor corridor. He wraps it in spell-a-tape and keeps it in the flat above the shop for when the time comes. He takes James Sirius and, eventually, Albus Severus to the shop on the first Saturday of every month. They sit on the counter and eat whatever from the testing shelf is safe for children that week. He answers every question with the seriousness each question deserves, which with James Sirius is considerable. He compiles, in a leather notebook, a catalog of the best pranks ever executed at Hogwarts, organized by location, target, and consequence. He adds a sealed section at the back, labeled in his best handwriting, in case you are ever very afraid and need to remember why things are worth it. He does not tell James what is in it. He wraps the sealed section in a charm that will only open when James is on the Hogwarts Express for the first time, which Fred considers appropriate timing. Some things need to be read in the right place. When James opens it years later in a compartment outside London, he finds one piece of parchment. On it, Fred has written, "The joke is the thing." Not because it's funny. Because making someone laugh is saying, "I see you, and I choose this moment, and I refuse to let the darkness have it. Remember that. Uncle Fred, the better-looking one." James Sirius Potter reads this twice, then folds it into his top pocket, then looks out the window at the countryside moving past and says nothing for long enough that his friends ask if he is all right. And he says yes, and he means it. But the moment that stays, the one Fred returns to in the years that follow, happens on an ordinary Tuesday in the spring. James Sirius is 7. He has been brought to the shop by Hermione, who has a ministry meeting, and has left him with Fred on the understanding that he will not return home, having learned anything that cannot be undone. Fred has taken this condition on board and set it aside. James is sitting on the counter, which is his preferred location in the shop. eating a chocolate frog and asking questions at the rate of approximately 1 per 30 seconds. He has covered why the pygmy puffs change color at night, whether it is possible to make a skiving snack box that affects teachers, how Fred and George know which ideas are good and which are bad, and whether Fred thinks Albus will end up in Slytherin, which is a question Fred handles with the delicacy it requires. Fred is sorting the afternoon stock. His left hand does its work, the tremor present as always, moving through the small boxes and jars with the practiced ease of someone who has spent 6 years adapting. James goes quiet. This is notable enough that Fred looks up. James is watching Fred's hand, not rudely, with the direct, interested focus he brings to everything. He watches it for a moment, the fine, persistent shake, box to shelf, box to shelf. "Why does your hand do that?" he asks. "Battle wound," Fred says. "From the war?" "Yeah." James considers this. His feet swing against the counter. He is wearing one red sock and one blue sock, which is not an accident. James Sirius Potter makes deliberate aesthetic choices, and always has. Does it hurt? Fred sets down the box he is holding. He looks at his hand. "Not anymore," he says. "It used to." "Now it's just there," James nods slowly, processing this the way he processes everything, thoroughly, without rushing toward a conclusion. The shop is quiet around them. Mid-afternoon. The good light coming through the front window and hitting the hope lamps so they glow their soft violet against the shelves. Then James reaches over and takes Fred's trembling hand in both of his. The same grip as when he was 4 months old on a Christmas afternoon. Both small hands around the one that shakes. Holding on. Not trying to stop it. Not fixing it. Just there. With it. The way Fred has always been there with it. The tremor continues under his hands, small and permanent and present. James Sirius looks at Fred's hand for a long moment. Then he looks up. "I'm glad you didn't die," he says. The way a 7-year-old says true things. Simply, directly, without understanding the full weight of them and somehow because of that delivering the weight with perfect accuracy. No preamble. No softening. Just the true thing. Plain. Fred looks at this small face. Harry's chaotic hair, Hermione's clear eyes, and something else. Something that belongs entirely to James Sirius himself. Some quality of directness and warmth that has been his from the first time he wrapped his hands around a trembling finger and decided it was fine. Fred's throat does something complicated. It takes him a moment. "Me too, mate," he says. Eventually, his voice is steady. "Just me too." James nods, satisfied, releases Fred's hand, and returns his attention to his chocolate frog with the easy completeness of someone who said what needed saying and considers the matter handled. Fred turns back to his stock. His hand is still shaking. He keeps working. The nightmares are not dramatic. This is the thing Fred has never been able to explain to anyone, because he has never tried to explain it to anyone. And also because the word nightmare carries connotations of something vivid and loud and cinematic. Fire, sound. The theatrical terror of the kind that wakes you gasping and leaves evidence in the room around you. Fred's nightmares are quiet. He is lying on the 7th floor corridor floor. The dust is settling. Percy is beside him. Percy reaches, and does not reach quite far enough. The stone comes down, and there is a moment of pressure. And then there is nothing. No sound. No darkness. Just nothing. Which is worse than darkness, because darkness implies something on the other side. He wakes at the same moment, every time. Just before. The nothing is always approximately 1 second away when he opens his eyes, and the 1 second takes approximately 20 minutes to stop feeling close. His left hand is always worse after. The tremor amplified, irregular, the nerve damage responding to what the rest of him has just been through. He lies in the dark and listens to his own breathing, and London at 3 a.m., which is a city that does not fully sleep, and which Fred has come to regard as a kind of company. The taxis and the distant sirens and the specific quality of city quiet that is not really quiet at all. He breathes through it. He waits for his heart rate to normalize. He does not go back to sleep for approximately an hour. He has been doing this for 7 years. He has not told anyone. October 2005. The shop is closed. The morning is dark still, the narrow street outside the front window holding the last of the pre-dawn gray. George is already downstairs when Fred comes down. This is not unusual. George has arrived before Fred every morning since the reopening. He opens quietly, makes tea, does the small preparatory work of a person who needs the shop to be ready before his own day can start. It is his version of Fred's note cards. Fred has always thought, the need to have something in order before the larger thing begins. Fred sits down at the workbench. George glances at him. Whatever he sees in Fred's face, the specific quality of someone who has been awake since 3 a.m. and has made a decision, he does not name. He pushes the second mug of tea across the bench and waits. "I have nightmares," Fred says. George is very still. The corridor. The wall. Fred looks at his hands. Both of them. The left trembling at its usual frequency. Every few nights, sometimes more. I wake up before it goes wrong, in the dream. But it goes wrong in the second before I wake. And it takes. He stops. It takes a while to leave. George says nothing. "I've been having them since the battle," Fred says. "I haven't told anyone. I didn't want to," he pauses. "I didn't want anyone to know that surviving it wasn't the same as being done with it." The workbench holds its collection of unfinished products. The hope lamps in the window are amber, the color of old firelight, the color of something burning down. Not their usual morning violet. Fred notices this and files it. George looks at him for a long moment. "What do you need?" he says. Not, "Why didn't you tell me?" Not, "How long has this been happening?" Not any of the things that would have been reasonable to say, and would have made Fred feel the weight of his own silence as a failing. Just, "What do you need?" The right question, delivered in the flat, practical tone of someone who has already decided that whatever the answer is, they will help. Fred looks at his brother. "I don't know," he says honestly. "I think I need someone who does." Hermione goes to the library. Of course she goes to the library. Fred would not have expected anything else and does not. This is what Hermione does with things that need addressing. She finds the correct body of knowledge, establishes what exists, identifies what is missing, and begins from there. It has worked for everything else. There is no particular reason it should not work for this. She spends 3 weeks in the Department of Mysteries archive, which she has ministry clearance to access in her capacity as a senior reform official, and which contains, it turns out, considerably more on the subject of psychological healing than the public Wizarding World Library would suggest. The research exists. It has simply been kept in a basement, which Hermione considers both typical and fixable. She emerges with 2 things. The first is an alchemical compound, a nerve regenerative agent still in its research phase, developed in the late 1980s and shelved for reasons Hermione describes as institutional incompetence, which she says in the tone she reserves for things that make her want to rewrite entire ministry departments. It addresses residual nerve damage, the kind that perpetuates physical responses to psychological stimulus, the kind in Fred's left hand. The second is a healer at St. Mungo's, a specialist in a new practice called memory curation, which does not remove memories, does not alter them, does not perform the kind of magical interference with human consciousness that has produced catastrophic results in the past. What it does is this. It places targeted memories in a pensieve and allows the patient to examine them from outside, to see them with full consciousness rather than being ambushed by them in the dark, to stand with the memory as an observer rather than an occupant. The logic is Hermione's. The technique is the healer's. The willingness is Fred's. He makes the appointment on a Tuesday. Tells no one except George. Goes alone the first time. Then lets George walk him there and wait outside for the 3 times after that. Then goes alone again, when alone stops being the wrong answer. 4 months of memory curation. 6 months of the alchemical compound. Short scenes. Fred arriving at a white-painted office on the 4th floor of St. Mungo's that smells like something clean and institutional and not unpleasant. Fred and George walking afterward in the early evening, not always talking, sometimes just walking, which is its own form of conversation. Fred sleeping through the night for the first time in 6 years on a Thursday in February, and waking at dawn confused by the absence of the familiar violence of the dream before realizing it, is simply morning. He sleeps through the night more often than not by April. He sleeps through the night most nights by June. In late July, Fred is sorting stock in the back room of the shop. Hermione, he calls. She is doing inventory 2 shelves over. She has been helping with the quarterly stock count since Fred mentioned, offhandedly, that paperwork was not his primary skill set, and Hermione had said "I know" in the tone that means she had been waiting to be asked. Her second child is 3 now and has her focus and Harry's instincts for trouble, which Fred considers an extraordinary combination. She comes around the corner. He is standing with his left arm extended, looking at his hand. She looks at it. The tremor is there, barely, a ghost of itself present only in the fine edge of his fingers, intermittent now, the echo of what it was rather than the thing itself. The nerve damage not healed, not gone, but receded, significantly, measurably, unmistakably receded. Is that? She starts. Nearly, Fred says. Not perfect. But nearly. Hermione Granger, who has faced Voldemort's forces, reformed an entire ministry department, and raised 2 children with Harry Potter, looks at Fred Weasley's nearly steady hand and bursts into tears. Fred stares at her. Then he puts his arm around her, careful and warm. She presses her face into his shoulder the way she did at the wedding, the way she did the morning after the battle, the specific Hermione cry that is not a performance but a release. The accumulated pressure of someone who keeps things together professionally, finally being given permission to let something down. I thought this was a happy moment, Fred says. It is, Hermione says into his shoulder. It just is, Fred holds her. The inventory waits. He wakes before dawn on a morning in August. He lies still and waits. The ambush does not come. The corridor is not there. The dust in the ceiling and the 1 second before nothing. Not there. The room is simply a room. The dark simply dark. London doing its continuous human work outside the window. His left hand rests against the sheet, nearly still. Fred gets up, goes to the kitchen, makes tea. He stands at the window and drinks it, and watches the city produce morning. The lights coming on in the buildings opposite. A bus turning the corner below. A woman walking quickly with a coat held shut against the early air. He thinks about the corridor. He lets himself think about it directly. He stands with it as an observer. The dust, Percy's grip, the sound of Hermione's voice somewhere above and ahead, the cold flat stone under his back. He can see it clearly. He can hold it at arm's length and look at it and understand its shape and dimensions and not be ambushed by it. It is a thing that happened. It is not a thing that is happening. He stands at the window with his tea going slowly cold. Thank you, he says aloud. To no one. To all of them. To Percy, who was fast enough. To Harry and Hermione, who were 20 feet away when the wall began to groan. To George, downstairs before the shop opened on a Tuesday in October. To the healer on the 4th floor. To the woman he watched cry over a nearly steady hand. To the morning, which keeps coming regardless. He finishes his tea. The shop opens in 3 hours. By 2007, Hermione has spent 5 years dismantling things. Not dramatically, not with press conferences or grand gestures. With paperwork, which is less satisfying in the immediate term and considerably more permanent in the long term. And Hermione has always been more interested in permanence than satisfaction. She has rewritten the house elf employment statutes. She has expanded centaur protections under the Beings Classification Act, which required changing the Classification Act itself, which required 3 years of coalition building and one very unpleasant committee meeting that she will not describe in detail except to say that she won. She has reformed the werewolf registration system so that it registers support rather than surveillance, which means Remus Lupin's name, had he survived, would now appear on a list of people entitled to housing assistance, rather than a list of people required to notify their employers of their condition. She did all of this from the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Her office is small, and its window faces a wall, and she has never once asked for a larger one. Now she is looking at the harder problem. The Pureblood Registry has existed since 1692. It is a document, multiple documents, ledgers, cross-referenced records, that classifies every witch and wizard in Britain by blood status, pure blood, half-blood, muggle-born. It underpins 200 years of differential treatment codified into law and custom, and the quiet, ambient assumption that some people's magic is more legitimate than others. Voldemort did not create this system, he simply used it. Hermione has been building toward this for a decade and she knows she cannot do it alone. She comes to the shop on a Tuesday evening in November. Fred and George are doing inventory. The shop is closed, the hope lamps at their low amber, the kind of quiet that belongs to the place after hours when it stops being a public thing and returns to being theirs. Hermione sits on the workbench, which she has done since the reopening, and lays out what she needs. The legal argument, the legislative pathway, the timeline. She presents it with the clean efficiency of someone who has been preparing this briefing in her head for several months and has timed it to 12 minutes. Fred and George listen. When she finishes, Fred says, "You need people the wizarding public actually likes." "Yes," Hermione says, as opposed to respects and is slightly frightened of. "That is an accurate characterization of my current public profile, and I have accepted it." George looks at Fred. Fred looks at George. The look that travels between them covers approximately 47 words of discussion in the span of 1 second. "Right," Fred says. "What do we do first?" The campaign takes 5 years and is never called a campaign. Fred and George simply begin talking about it. In the shop, at events, in the interviews the Daily Prophet requests with increasing frequency as Weasley's Wizard Wheezes becomes something that functions less like a shop and more like a cultural institution. They talk about it the way they talk about everything. Directly, without mystifying it, with occasional jokes that contain more structural argument than most formal speeches. The scholarship is Percy's idea, which surprises everyone except the people who know Percy well. 1,000 galleons to every Hogwarts student who would have been denied access under the old pure-blood preferential admissions framework. Percy processes the paperwork to make it tax-exempt. The Daily Prophet names it the Fred and George Scholarship in the headline, and the name sticks before either of them has agreed to it, which Fred considers the most efficient branding exercise they have ever not done. Fred's speech happens at the reopening of a rebuilt Diagon Alley robe shop in the spring of 2011. He is not the scheduled speaker. He is there because the owner is an old Hogwarts acquaintance, and Fred believes in showing up. He ends up at a lectern for reasons that are not entirely clear and speaks for 12 minutes. He says, "Voldemort told us that some of us mattered less because of who we were born to. And we believed him, or we pretended not to notice, or we told ourselves it wasn't our problem. And then we paid the price of that belief in bodies. We will not do it again. Not on my watch. Not on George's watch. Not on Hermione's watch. And trust me, she has the best watch of the three of us. She's had it for 20 years. The speech is on the front page of every magical newspaper in Britain the following morning. Hermione reads it over breakfast, sets it down and says to Harry, "He did that on purpose." "I know," Harry says. "The whole extemporaneous thing is a performance." "I know." "He prepared that. He prepares everything," Harry says. "He just doesn't let anyone see the note cards." Hermione becomes Minister for Magic in 2012. She is 33 years old. The appointment is not unanimous. Nothing worth doing is unanimous, but it is substantial, and the opposition is the kind that argues about procedure rather than qualification, which Hermione considers both predictable and manageable. Her office faces the atrium. She has not asked for a larger window. Some things remain consistent. June 14, 2015, the Ministry atrium holds a specific kind of crowd, not the milling uncertainty of an ordinary workday, not the formal stiffness of a ceremony. Something in between. People who have been told this is significant and believe it, gathered in the marble hall under its magical ceiling, present because they want to be, rather than because they were required to be. Fred and George stand together near the front, Harry beside them, Ron and Ginny and their families, Arthur and Molly. Percy, who has been the internal architect of half the legislative groundwork for this moment, and whose name will appear in the footnotes of the official record, which Percy genuinely prefers. Hermione stands at a table in the center of the atrium. On the table, the dissolution order. A single document, dense with the legal language she has spent 8 years perfecting. Beside it, the registry itself, the bound ledgers, the cross-referenced records, the 200-year-old bureaucracy of deciding who belonged and who belonged less. She signs the dissolution order. The ink is ordinary. The pen is the same one she uses for everything. She has no patience for ceremony when the act itself is the thing. She sets down the pen. She looks up at the atrium, at the assembled people, survivors and their children, Muggle-borns who spent the war in hiding, families who lost people to a system that decided some of them were expendable. She looks at all of them and she is tired in the deep way of someone who has been fighting for 8 years toward this specific moment and has just arrived. She does not give a speech. She says, "We're done pretending that some of us are worth less. We're done." Fred starts the applause. Not because anyone needs a signal, the applause was coming regardless. He starts it because he is Fred Weasley, and he has been present for this woman's work since the morning she kept him alive on a stone floor, and he intends to be the first person in every room that recognizes what she has done. George joins him immediately. Same instant, same hands. The twins being the twins, which is its own kind of statement. The atrium fills with the sound of it. At the back of the crowd, Arthur leans close to Molly. She is not crying. She is beaming. The specific uncontained beam of a woman who knows her daughter-in-law is extraordinary, and has always known it, and has never once stopped being glad. "She reminds me of you," Arthur says quietly. Molly turns to look at him. "She's tougher than me." "No," Arthur says, with the certainty of a man who has loved the same woman for 4 decades, and knows precisely what he is looking at. Not tougher, just differently trained. Molly considers this. The applause continues around them. Fred, near the front, has put 2 fingers in his mouth and produced a whistle that carries across the entire atrium. George is laughing. Hermione, at the table, is receiving it with the composed grace of someone who practiced composure until it became genuine. "All right," Molly says finally. "Differently trained." She beams again. The registry sits on the table beside the signed order, waiting to be taken to the archive where it will remain as a record of what the magical world chose to stop believing about itself on a Tuesday in June. Not destroyed, destruction would be its own kind of lie, would pretend it never existed. Preserved instead, in the same spirit as Ginny's list of living names. Evidence. In case anyone forgets. In case anyone forgets what it cost. In case anyone forgets why it stopped. Platform 9 3/4 smells exactly the same as it always has. Coal smoke and autumn. The specific warmth of a steam engine that has been running since before any of the people on this platform were born. The red of the locomotive is the same red it has always been. Not faded. Not modernized. The same committed, unapologetic red of a thing that knows what it is and sees no reason to revise. The platform is full of families saying goodbye. Harry is not crying. His eyes are simply experiencing some environmental irritant, which he would like noted for the record. Hermione is holding it together with the focused composure of a woman who has run a ministry department and passed major legislation and faced worse than this. She is holding it together very well. She has been holding it together since they left the house. She will, in all probability, stop holding it together in the car on the way home, and Harry will not mention it. And they will both understand that some things are allowed. Lily Potter, 11 years old. Harry's eyes and Hermione's terrifying precision, looks at her parents with the patient tolerance of someone who has prepared extensively for this day and considers their emotional state to be their own problem to manage. "I'll write," she says. "Every Sunday. I promise. Monday is also acceptable," Hermione says. "Sunday," Lily says firmly, which is pure Hermione, and Harry catches Fred's eye across the platform and Fred makes a face that says you are raising yourself. Congratulations, which is accurate enough that Harry has to look away. They are all here. Bill and Fleur, silver in her hair now, his scarred face easy in the September light. Charlie, who has kept his vow of never missing a family gathering he can reach. He arrives from Romania on the morning train every September 1st, and leaves the same evening and considers this entirely reasonable. Percy and Audrey, whose daughters are already on the train somewhere in the forward carriages. Ron and Ginny and their families, the noise of everyone talking at once. The overlapping conversations of people who have been together long enough that their words don't wait for gaps. Fred and George stand together. They always stand together, still, the same way they always have. Close, facing the same direction, the completed circuit. Fred's left hand is nearly steady in the warm morning. One of his daughters is on his shoulders, 7 years old, imperious, currently conducting a negotiation about what she is owed, in exchange for having allowed her father to bring her here without sufficient advance notice. George has his arm around Angelina. Angelina is laughing at something with her whole body, the laugh that fills rooms regardless of their size. Molly stands beside Arthur and does the count she has done every morning for 40 years. The number is right. The number has been right for 19 years, and it is right this morning, and she allows herself, quietly and without announcement, to feel the full weight of that rightness. The whistle blows once. Warning, James Sirius Potter appears at a window 3 carriages back, in the manner of someone who has been on this train for approximately 6 minutes and has already located every available vantage point. He is 13 and has been at Hogwarts for 2 years, and is here on the grounds that he wanted to see Lily off, which is true, and also that the particular prefect assigned to his carriage is someone he has been looking forward to inconveniencing since June, which he has not mentioned to his parents. He finds Fred in the crowd without difficulty. Fred is not difficult to find. The sealed section. James shouts, across the platform in the steam and the noise of 100 families. I read it. Fred pushes through to the window. Andy? And I've got a plan for the astronomy tower already. 3rd floor corridor. East side there's a... Good lad. Fred. Harry and Hermione say, simultaneously, with the unified precision of 2 people who have had 19 years of practice. Fred turns to them. Turns back to the window. But please apply appropriate safety standards and consider the structural load-bearing implications before committing to any specific location. A prefect appears behind James and seizes him by the collar with the expression of someone who has already identified this particular 3rd year as a full-time occupation. James grins, Harry's chaotic hair, Hermione's clear eyes, and something entirely his own. The specific confidence of someone who knows exactly what kind of family is standing on the platform behind him. And disappears into the steam. The train moves. Harry watches the carriages pass. The faces in the windows. Children going back to the place that made most of the people on this platform who they are. He watches until the last carriage clears the platform and turns the corner and is gone, and the steam closes behind it like a curtain. Fred comes to stand beside him. George takes his position on Fred's other side. The 3 of them stand in a row looking down the empty track where the train was, the steam still drifting through the space it occupied, patient and unhurried. Next year, Fred says, Lily comes home with a full report on every prankable location in the castle. She's going to be exactly like you, Harry says. I know. Fred says it with enormous, unambiguous satisfaction. It's what I've been working toward. Harry shakes his head. He is smiling. The specific smile he only produces in this specific configuration. These people, this family, this assembled improbable survival that has made it intact to a September morning in 2017. The smile that does not require explanation, because the people it is for already understand it. Fred, Harry says. A beat. The steam drifts over the empty track. Somewhere in the station a child is crying about a forgotten pet. The platform pigeons conduct their neutral, eternal business with the detached professionalism of creatures who have seen everything and been impressed by none of it. I'm glad you didn't die. Fred is quiet for a moment. He looks at the empty track, at the space where the train was, at the steam that is already thinning in the morning air. He looks at the platform they are standing on, this ordinary, extraordinary place that the 3 of them have now stood on as children, and adults and parents, watching the train go, being the ones who stayed behind. He looks at Harry. Yeah, says Fred Weasley. Me too. It seemed like the more interesting option. The family moves toward the barrier slowly. There is no rush. There is never a rush when they are all in the same place. This is something they learned individually, at different speeds, in different ways, and have not forgotten, when the people you love are present, you do not sprint for the exit. You stay a little longer than necessary. You let it be what it is. Fred has his daughter back on his shoulders. She has completed her negotiation successfully, and is now angling for a second victory regarding the Transfiguration book she wants. Fred is explaining that he will buy her 2 books if she can tell him the first joke she ever learned. She is thinking about this with the seriousness it deserves. Molly is asking Arthur whether Sunday dinner is at the Burrow or at Harry and Hermione's. It is a conversation they have had every week for 20 years. Neither of them needs it settled before they reach the barrier. The asking is the point. George says something to Angelina that makes her laugh her enormous laugh, the one that bounces off the ceiling of King's Cross and turns heads all the way to the Muggle concourse. Several strangers smile without knowing why. They pass through the barrier in 1s and 2s. Bill and Fleur. Charlie, already checking his return train time. Percy and Audrey. Ron, Ginny. Harry takes Hermione's hand and they step through together, back to the ordinary world. To the lives they built out of the rubble of the worst night in recent memory, the ordinary, extraordinary lives of people who survived something, and chose, every day since, to use the survival. The platform empties. Fred and George are the last ones through. They walk side by side, unhurried, Fred's daughter between them. She has one hand in Fred's, and one hand in George's. She looks up at her father, then at her uncle, then decides she would like to be swung, which she communicates by lifting her feet. They swing her. She laughs. The specific laugh of a child who has no reason not to, who has been raised by people who know exactly why you laugh and choose it anyway. Deliberately, as an act of faith in the world you want to exist. The laugh of someone who has been handed something intact. Fred and George walk through the barrier. The platform is empty. The steam lingers over the track where the train was, patient and soft, the last evidence of the morning. Then that too dissolves. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.